What's up, Five fans? We're live. We're back with the ContenderCast, the final one of the season. I'm Nolan King alongside Big Tone. Tony, how we doing, man? You pumped to talk about the last week, the one we just watched? A big ending, a big beginning, and a lot of finishes in between, man.
Yeah, lightning fast card, a lot of finishes, which is what we all come to the Contender Series for. And just a great bookend to this season. Obviously, we have the Brazil one coming up, but this is the last live event that we will be able to see.
Yeah, man. Maybe we'll come back for like a special edition episode after all the Brazil ones air. There's only 3 of them, so don't really know when that's going to happen yet. I guess what I've heard is that they're trying to shoot for September for it to air in Brazil. We have no idea when we're going to end up getting it. It could be, as soon as September or even later, I'm assuming, with just the way the TV rights are and everything. But regardless, man, we had a great U.S. version of the season, a lot of exciting moments, and we'll recap the season as a whole at the end of this episode. But for now, let's get right into it. We had a phenomenal fight. Probably the best back and forth action that we had on the entire card was in the first fight. Alex Gilpin versus J.R. Cochran. This was an excellent fight, man. Before I looked into this fight and studied the tape, I was expecting Alex Gilpin to be the guy that should be the heavy favorite, just in the fact that he was so much more experienced. And if you looked at his opponent's win-loss record, it was quite impressive, especially for a guy that's going to just, coming into the Contender Series level of fights. He had quite the resume coming in. But after watching some tape on Cochran, the kid has some serious upside. He didn't have a ton of fights under his belt, only 6-0 going into this fight. But certainly, both of them prove that there's somebody that are going to end up in the UFC at some point, in my opinion. A lot of back and forth action. I thought Cochran got the best of the first round, the better of the exchange in the first round. And then Gilpin, switches things up on him in the second round, takes him down and just subs him really quick. What were your overall thoughts on not only Gilpin's performance in the win, but also in Cochran's performance in the loss?
Yeah, I wasn't expecting this kind of fight. I thought we were going to see a much more wrestling-based attack, I guess, from – both guys are wrestlers, but I don't know. I wasn't sure. I thought Gilpin was more of a wrestler, and I thought we would just see more. And instead, the first round was just a complete slugfest. So that was a surprising, bit of, enjoyment for me. And then, like you said, once the second round came around, I was just like, oh, now I'm going to take you down and sub you out real quick. And we got a little bit of taste of that, from Gilpin and when he was brought into ACB. I think he was actually brought into ACB to kind of be, I don't think fodder is the right word, but to set up one of their local fighters for a win over a guy with a good record that might have on paper kind of looked a little bit thin. And he subbed him out. So, that was, I guess, a sign of things to come here. But yeah, still, Cochran was very impressive in the first, but in the striking exchanges, I thought he was the sharper striker, honestly. So there's a lot of upside with both these guys. And just what a way to kick off the last, Contender Series event that we're going to see live this year. So that was just a really great curtain jerker.
Yeah, absolutely, man. And, it's just so sad every time you bring up that this is the last episode, because the action, just continued on, especially on this card. We saw another Darce choke in the second round. Bobby Moffitt taking on Jacob Kilburn. Kilburn was a little less experienced than Moffitt. Moffitt had been to the high stages of the regional scene. He lost an RFA title fight. He lost an LFA title fight. He fought on Dana White looking for a fight. So, a handful of other fights in LFA and in the debunked RFA. But, man, he just went out there and showed that there was a big gap between, himself and Jacob Kilburn. I thought that, it was a dominant performance. Maybe it wasn't the sexiest performance in terms of, going out there and scoring a head kick knockout or some of these other finishes that we've seen on the Contender Series. But, you got to give it to him. He was given a task, and he went out there and just completely dominated Jacob Kilburn from bell to bell, picking up the second round submission. What were your overall thoughts on Moffitt's performance? And do you think it was just maybe a little bit too soon for Kilburn, just 23 years of age?
Man, I was super impressed by Moffitt. I was expecting him to get the win here, obviously, but just in such dominant fashion, man. And look at his losses that he had when he was with the. Well, one of them was RFA. We'll just call them Access TV fights, title fights that he had. One was against Barcelos, who I think just finished Kurt Holloway at
the Boise card.
Yeah, the Boise card. That was just recently. And the other guy was Ton Lee, who we've seen destroy somebody on Contender Series as well. So, I mean, those aren't bad losses at all. Really, just for Kilburn, man, I don't know. I think saying it was a little too early is pretty spot on. Maybe the experience just wasn't there. I don't think. I really think, a guy like Moffitt's just on a different level at this point in his career. And I mean, Moffitt, man, I'm excited to see him fight in the UFC, and I guess we'll do the matchmaker at the end. But
yeah, we can do that at the end. So I think that you pretty much nailed all my additional thoughts on that fight. There wasn't a ton to talk about in reality, which is kind of the case about the next fight as well. Kennedy Nchukwu taking on Dennis Bryant in the light heavyweight division. Nchukwu's second stint on the Contender Series. He competed last summer, didn't get the contract, even though he did get a win in that bout against Anton Berzin. I think it was either week 7 or week 8. It was one of the later weeks of season 1. But he's back, another year of experience under his belt. Had a win or two for LFA, came in, looked much improved, a lot more polished. I know for the brief time that we got to see him, he's taking on Dennis Bryant, a guy with a pretty interesting backstory, pretty powerful, message and everything. Seems like a pretty authentic guy when I got to talk to him this week. Super nice guy, but maybe just a little bit too much for him. I mean, Alaska FC, I give, when you're from a small area, small, regional circuit, I mean, you take what you can get. I don't fault any of these guys for wanting to fight at home or whatever, but sometimes, the competition that you're going to face on the Contender Series, if you're the surging guy in Alaska FC, the chances of them having another surging guy that you've gone against are pretty low, especially when you're a bigger weight guy like Dennis Bryant. So this was his first real test, and I mean, it was a really tough one. Just intangibles alone, Kennedy Nchukwu presents a really unique, matchup stylistically for anybody. He's like the Stefan Struve of the 205-pound division, 6'5", 205 pounds. So, I mean, Bryant tried to get inside him as much as he could, but man, you can only try so much. Nchukwu ended up getting him out of there inside 2 minutes, I believe. Just a dominant performance by him. Did you think that he looked improved from when we last saw him? And where do you think he goes from here? Do you think he's a guy that could have some success in the UFC's 205-pound division sometime down the line?
Yeah, sometime down the line. Still very raw, which is why I don't think he was signed the first time. He's improved to 6-0, I believe. And like you said, 6'5", I think he has an 82, 83 inch reach. It's pretty insane. The kick he caught Dennis Bryant with coming in, just extremely well timed. The guy's scary, man. Reminds me of Eric Anders, I guess, kind of in some ways. I'm just not sure, who he'll be fighting. He's so unpolished that it'd be tough, to match him up. But definitely, very impressive, and I thought he improved a lot on what we saw last time out. These Alaskan FC guys, man. I'm kind of on the fence between what Lynch tweeted out about, I mean, you can only fight who's in front of you.
Mhm.
And I mean, when you're in Alaska, I mean, there's not a whole lot going on up there. It's kind of like, if you want to travel down to get more fights, it's pretty hard.
Yeah.
And also, it's a smaller promotion that still gives you a little bit of exposure with the partnership with the UFC Fight Pass. So I don't fault anybody who fights there. It's just it's something to keep an eye on as far as who's coming out of there.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, man. I think that's pretty spot on. And, you know, because the thing is, again, I mean, this is like just the reoccurring theme on the show that I feel like I say this every time, like a broken record, is you can't judge people. You can't state facts about people's abilities by saying, oh, they haven't been tested, because you don't see where their ceiling is. But it makes the likelihood of them not being as good, if they have a padded record, it makes that likelihood higher. So again, like Maurice Mitchell we saw last week, he went out there, he looked pretty good. It was a competitive fight, even though he got finished in the first round. I mean, I thought if that round, had ended, if it had continued the way that it was going and just ended, which is, again, kind of a fantasy land scenario, but, he would have won that round. So just about these guys getting, better competition to show us that we can think higher of them when we try to do predictions or try to predict how they do in the UFC, things like that. But, I think also on a more practical level, it helps improve their skills so that when they get in these situations, it's not the first time that they're seeing, another big guy standing across the cage or another quick guy or somebody that moves like that.
Can we talk about Fortis MMA for a second? Because
yeah, absolutely.
Like they've dominated Contender Series and starting to move on to UFC. Like,
sure.
These guys are just there's a lot of killers in that camp. Like I said, with Kennedy, obviously super raw when he fought on the first Contender Series, went to a split decision, had only had like 2 fights, and they were with was XKO. Is that his regional promotion that he's from?
I think so.
And this time around, he had another 2 fights since his last fight, Contender Series fight. One of them was on XKO, and the other one was actually on LFA 40. So, LFA, known for their good matchmaking, fought I'm not sure who he fought, but, it's a step in the right direction. And I feel like we've just seen Fortis MMA over and over again throughout the season.
Yeah, absolutely. Throughout the whole Contender Series, really, because I mean, I'm trying to think back. I know that the first time I heard of them, I think, was they had Sean Spencer, who was a UFC veteran at one point, and then they also had Matt Hobar, who was a UFC veteran that had to retire.
Ocho Peterson.
What's that?
Ocho.
They have Ocho, but I was thinking, before the Contender Series ever came into existence.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
2 UFC fighters. Damon Jackson's one of them as well. So they had 3 guys. And since that time, I mean, you look at who just gets signed off the show. Ocho, like you said, Steven Peterson, Charles Bird, Jeff Neal, Alonzo Menafield earlier this season, Ryan Spann earlier this season, Kennedy. So, I mean, they're just on a roll right now in terms of, bringing talent to the UFC. They had Youssef Salah, or maybe he's not from that gym. I'm trying to remember who else. I know they have a bunch of other prospects coming up. Austin Lingo is a guy for LFA right now. Eli Temez is a guy that I think we'll see both of them in the UFC eventually. But yeah, man, I just think the sky's the limit for them. They've got the funding clearly from, former NBA All-Star Deron Williams owns them. He's putting a lot of money, I'm assuming, into it. It looks like a beautiful facility. MMA Junkie actually did a really good piece on them, a little tour of the gym. They have like a putt-putt like golf thing up on the roof. They have like a lounge area up there. It's pretty beautiful. So I've heard nothing but good things, and I expect to see more from them in the future. I think the sky's the limit at this point.
One of my favorite non-Laker NBA players. I love that guy.
Yeah. No, he was pretty good, man. I love those old Jazz teams, like when they kind of were a little blue collar.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
But
Anyway,
does he train MMA? Just real quick.
I think he does like you know, for cardio, like for the off season, he would do stuff, but I don't think
That's how
I'm
he
not
got
sure
into it.
how much his involvement is with it now.
But
Other than
that's how I feel like that's how a lot of athletes get into it in the off season.
yeah,
They'll start doing like kickboxing or something. We see that at the NFL.
yep.
And
They've
it's
been
actually
doing
turned some guys into, I mean, kickboxing fighters and whatnot. So
yeah, the Performance Institute's been doing a lot of stuff with the NBA. I mean, we've seen a bunch of teams on the the beginning of their preseason go and train a day at the Performance Institute. I think the Clippers were there recently. They brought out the UFC brought like Donald Cerrone and a few other fighters to teach classes. Forrest Griffin, I'm assuming. So yeah, it's good to. I'm sure that a lot more athletes would be interested in it if they gave it a shot. You know, taking out your anger on inanimate objects is always a good stress reliever and a good way to burn off some calories as well. So, yeah. Anyways, before we get too far sidetracked, we got brought to the co-main event after that light heavyweight fight. You know, another good fight. It was one of the I'd say top 5 fights of the season that I had circled in terms of talent. Two top tier talents facing each other. We had 8-0 Joseph Lowry out of CFFC and V3 Fights. He was taking on Devontae Smith, a guy that's kind of bounced around. I mean, he actually didn't even have a team up until this camp where he joined Factory X. He went from Ohio all the way to Colorado to start training. You know, moved his life out there essentially, and I guess he's found a home, man, because he had an impressive finish against Joseph Lowry after, I wouldn't say dominating him, but having the edge on Lowry for the first few minutes of the fight. Lowry shot for a takedown, tried to go to his bread and butter with the wrestling, and Devontae Smith, man, bringing back Travis Brown, Gabriel Gonzaga, Travis Brown, Josh Barnett, those elbows, man, just knocking them out with the little side elbows that are like, everybody says 12-6. Those are like 11 to 5 elbows right there. And I just had to look at a clock to see which direction they were going in. But yeah, so it was super impressive. That was probably the performance that impressed me the most tonight. I don't know if you agree with that or if something else had caught your eye. But regardless, man, pretty impressive win.
yeah, I like that. Always a big fan of just elbowing the fuck out of someone when they're trying to take you down. Best takedown defense out there, man. Also, great choice to join Factory X if you're trying to work on your stand-up game, man. Like, I really don't know much about his background. It's more of a wrestling based or whatever. But I mean, that's an extremely good place to be if you want to work on that stand-up. Some great coaches out there. That it was definitely impressive. I also liked. I know some people had a problem with. It seems like anytime these guys show any personality, there's always backlash. But it's like it's just kind of the name of the game. You're trying to promote yourself. And I also liked how he had a call out ready and everything. That shows me, that he's thinking ahead. He's got confidence. He's kind of got like a game plan as far as where he wants to go in his career. These guys who are just like, I'll take whoever, blah, blah, blah. It's like they're usually just following somebody else, their coaches or whatever. And I like the guys who have like a plan themselves, they have the initiative better. And he called out John Gunther, who was, of course, on the Ultimate Fighter just recently. He's trying to avenge a loss that he suffered back on the regional scene last year.
Great fight, by the way. If you ever look that one up, that's a fun fight.
Is that on YouTube?
I think it might have been a Flow Combat fight, but I believe at one point it was up for like a free fight of the week for them. So I don't know if that's still posted somewhere, but it's
probably look it up on social media.
Yeah. It's one of those fights that the crowd really gets into too, and it just makes the environment kind of wild. So it was pretty fun. But yeah, man, like you said, he's got quite the personality. I mean, a pretty authentic guy. I think that's, for me, I never necessarily get aggravated at the guys for not doing call-outs. I know I'm like in the vast minority when it comes to those things, but sometimes I find it to be really forced. But I mean, the call-out that he made was great. I mean, it makes sense. both now and in terms of divisional ascent up the division, but also the fact that he has that loss to Gunther on his record. Why not avenge it? Put the one to rest. Make people never look at it and think that anybody else has an advantage over you. That was awesome. I thought he did a little Fortnite dance afterwards too. When we
I don't understand those at all. I must be getting old because like all those references just go like completely over my head now,
yeah.
and they seem to like really resonate with the younger guys, and I'm just lost.
Yeah,
But
man.
like,
I'm not like a huge video game guy, but when Fortnite was in its prime, which I don't even know if it still is, when I was living up in New Hampshire, one of my roommates, had one of the kids I lived with had brought up the PS4 or something. I'm not a huge video game guy, but once that got downloaded, man, there was just like days of my life that were just disappeared. And when I interviewed Devontae last a couple of weeks ago for the Contender Series fight, he brought it up, and me and him went back and forth about Fortnite for like 5 minutes. It was, I don't know. It's just one of those games, man. Like, I'm not a big video game guy, but I have to give props because the game is really, really addicting, as much as I hate to say it.
and one last point about that. I mean, like, I would agree with you. The forced well, when you make forced call outs, like the kind of like ongoing joke about calling out Brock Lesnar is getting really old really fast. And then also just calling out unrealistic opponents.
Right.
Like you're coming off like your second UFC win and you're like calling out like the champion. It's just like, come on. But when they make sense, like you said, like this one makes a lot of sense. I think, and I think a lot of guys do put thought into it. They're actually like, this is who I want to fight. That's more what I'm looking for. Not like, I want to fight Brock Lesnar. Oh, so funny. I'm a bantamweight. Like,
yeah. It was Sam Alvey was the first guy I think that really jumped on the bandwagon of call-outs. I used to like look forward to his fights just because I knew he had like a really calculated call-out for after the fight. So yeah, I'm a big fan of the matchups when they make sense, like you said, and it's not like either some type of running old joke or something that's just unrealistic. So, anyways, to the main event, we'll probably talk about this fight about 10 times as long as the fight actually took, the fight actually lasted. Greg Hardy going in there, just running through another undefeated opponent in Tebaris Spoon Gordon. Not really much for me to say about this one. I wasn't a fan of the matchmaking on paper. I mean, Gordon does have he's 3-0. He fought for LFA. I mean, we're talking about the heavyweight division. You don't have a million choices, but I feel like they probably could have found somebody, not somebody that was going to go out there and murder, Greg Hardy. That wouldn't make any sense either, but just somebody that would maybe be a little step up from Gordon, at least size-wise. I think that's just a huge part of it, man. I mean, he had 4 inches on him, 4-inch reach advantage, and the thing that was killer was the weight. I mean, I don't know. I didn't see on the broadcast, but on UFC.com it said that Gordon only weighed 240 pounds. So if that's accurate, which judging from looking at him tonight, I would say definitely weighs more than that. But Hardy was just the bigger man, and that's when you're in the heavyweight division, your intangibles are, that's pretty much what you base your fight around. There's just, as you move up the weight divisions, you have less skill and more athleticism or more strength and power. And that's what we just see out of Greg Hardy. Just more of the same. I mean, if you go back and watch our episode, the first episode we did of this, my thoughts are exactly the same. Like, this guy could be in the UFC. Going to develop him some more. I expect more of this before we get any type of challenge for him.
Yeah, this fight really did nothing for me, and I was with you on the matchmaking. It just didn't add up when they did it. Going from Menafield to him seemed like such a big step down. I also was really wanted to see the Sales fight, the original. I think that was the original one, right?
Yeah, I mean, that would have been. I'm okay with the Lane one just because I feel like they were the same experience level. Like Lane had
Austin Lane, not Menafield. My bad.
Yeah. Which I was fine with, but the Sales one, I'm surprised they didn't go back to that. I mean, I don't know what type of injury Sales had or why he got removed, but that's the type of opponent I'm talking about. Somebody that's got experience. Maybe they're not going to be a UFC champion or anything, but there's somebody that can hang with them physically.
Yeah, I went and watched tape on Tebaris Gordon as soon as the fight was announced. The LFA 17 fight was against just like some gigantic you know, 5'9", 250-pound dude. You know, like it just it wasn't impressive. You know, I know it's a win in LFA, but it was like it was a 1-0 guy fighting, you know, a guy who's probably a a lightweight if he actually
Yeah.
stayed in shape.
Which actually, that fighter ended up, he is actually the Valor Fights champion, I think, now. Chandler Cole.
So now I'm all out of pocket.
Yeah. Which, no, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to throw off your point, but I was just saying, you know, that this trying to imply that the state of the heavyweight division is a weird one. Like,
it's pretty brutal. And that's what makes it so hard with Greg Hardy, because it's like there's such a fine line between you. There's such a big jump, I guess, between, you know, guys that don't have a lot of fights, and then you have the upper class heavyweights, and it's like it'd be such a huge risk, you know. But I guess at some point you just have to like throw Greg Hardy in the deep end kind of thing.
Yeah.
But Dana White's not there yet. Like he said after the show today, like basically, you know, he's still not ready. So we're not going to see him. I don't think we're going to see him in the UFC next. I don't know where he goes. LFA would make the most sense, I guess.
Yeah, I'd give him like an LFA vet, you know, somebody. There's a guy named Jared Vandera who was somebody I was thinking of. Somebody like him who, you know, was at one point viewed as somebody that could potentially get to the UFC, still kind of hanging out in that same category where, you know, a couple wins, he could be signed. But, you know, somebody that's in the top 10 heavyweights LFA has, but not like in the top 5, I think would be good next. I mean, give him somebody that you know has been tested and has been able to, you know, put up more of a fight than somebody that's with 3-0 and 4-0 fighters. Your pool of information is so small. You can't even tell really that much about them. So especially with heavyweights, man, like
this is why I was so confused about Greg Hardy's amateur career, because it was like, why is he an amateur MMA? Like the heavyweight regional scene of pro MMA is so bad anyway. Like you might as well just be fighting pro.
Now I might be completely making this up and talking out of my ass, but I thought I'd have to check, but I think there are some states that might require you to take amateur fights before you turn pro. I don't know if that's the case with Texas or anything. I know there was one state I was dealing with that was the case. I don't know. It might even be Massachusetts, that they required you to have a winning record and even or above record with 4 amateur fights or something like that.
That would clear that up. I mean, LFA.
I'm not sure though, because Texas is pretty. Not trying to be stereotypical, but it's like the wild, wild west there in terms of everything that goes on. Like,
is it?
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, they had LFA go out of their way to have Greg Hardy on amateur. You know, LFA doesn't do amateur fights. Like they went out of their way to get Greg Hardy on the prelims as an amateur.
Actually, a post lim too.
Was it?
Yeah. If you watch that, I believe if you watched that fight in the arena, which they have it listed as a prelim, I'm 90 on Tapology. I'm 95% sure that it took place. Actually after the main event. Maybe I'm wrong because maybe they had him on the broadcast. I don't know. I think I'm wrong. I think I'm talking out of my ass, and I'm going to stop.
Greg Hardy has had 5 MMA fights so far, amateur and MMA. I don't think that they've combined lasted 5 minutes.
No.
Like there's a problem with the matchmaking. Like he has to fight somebody where we're actually going to learn something. Because right now, like it's cool. It's like a highlight. Okay, cool. Like the casual fans, they see this ex-NFL football player, whether you hate him or love him, whatever. You know, he's going out there and you get these highlight reel knockouts, right? But for us who like watch the sport, we're like, he's knocking out like complete like nobodies. Like it just doesn't do anything, you know, for us who are actually like trying to pay attention to this. It just, I don't know. I don't know where he goes from here. I think, you would know better than I. The name you threw out from LFA,
Yeah.
it makes
Like,
sense. But
just to give you an idea, his last 3 fights have lasted 1 minute and 28 seconds combined.
yeah, like that's just there's something, you gotta do better.
Right. Right, exactly. That's the way I think. If a prospect's proving himself it's one thing if a guy's squeaking by, you don't want to rush him. At the same time, does it really benefit a fighter to throw him in? Like, is he going to get matched up with a guy that's, 3-1 next or 2-0 or something? Like, is that going to help him, or is it going to help him to face a guy that's 4-4 or 6-2? You know what I mean? A guy that has experience in there who, with the heavyweight division, especially regionally, records kind of don't mean anything. Like, these guys round robin each other, beating each other on the regional circuit so much that it gets super confusing and who's good and who's not. I mean, you look at who tried out for the Ultimate Fighter this past season and who made it. Like, the records aren't great, but they're the cream of the crop. So I want to find somebody that's a veteran, somebody that's been through some experiences, has some solid wins on his resume, and somebody you can kind of place Greg Hardy in the world of MMA. I think it would be.
The only thing which we already knew heading into this was that we got from this fight. The one takeaway, Greg Hardy is ferocious. The barrage he let out was not only vicious, but it was calculated. The strike that landed was right on the sweet spot. And you see with Greg Hardy that he gets so locked in, and that's definitely something you want from a fighter, is someone that gets really zoned in. And I don't want to beat the NFL horse to death, but it's like, to be that level of athlete, I mean, you just, there's certain things that the NFL athletes have that type of athlete, has, that, athletes, and this is not to shit on UFC athletes or anyone in MMA, but like, to be honest, like these like an NFL player can come to MMA and fight, right?
Yep.
But you take Demetrius Mighty Mouse Johnson and throw him on a football field, I don't think that's going to turn out very well.
No, not at all. Hey, you can throw Ronda Rousey in the WWE ring, though. Did you think of that?
That's totally different. But you know what I'm saying? Like,
yeah.
That level of like focus, that just like locked in that you see from Greg Hardy, where he's just like so like pumped up and just lasered in, is pretty insane. Like, it's just something you don't. I mean, you obviously see it from the champions and whatnot, but it's and the athleticism and everything. I think it's, once he gets to a certain point, it's going to be pretty scary.
Yeah, I mean, I can't speak for him. Obviously, I don't know what's going on inside his head, but I would say at this point, for a guy that, for legitimate reasons or for not, I'm not going to go through that whole thing right now, but somebody who a lot of people have a lot to say about, a lot of people have a lot of negative things to say about, and for him to, have gone into the woodwork and now resurfaced and is now competing at a high level in a different professional sport. Like, I'm sure this guy is mentally focused. He's very, not concerned with what people have to say about him at this point, clearly from everything that we've seen. So I think, in terms of a mindset too, like, forget about, the physical. I mean, as much as you can forget about Greg Hardy's physique and his athleticism, the guy's mentally tough too, in terms of blocking out the haters and staying focused. So kind of a scary combination, especially in the shallow heavyweight division, like we said. So super excited to see what they do with him next. But before we get to what Dana White actually did,
like, one last thing on Hardy though, is like, we're this podcast is not a podcast where we talk about topics that are outside of fighting. Like, we have other podcasts for that. So like,
sure.
If you want to hear thoughts, more opinionated.
Right. We could talk for hours about other things like that. It's such a deep issue that I feel like you said, we have other podcasts that actually do that. So why not let those podcasts do that?
Exactly.
Okay. onto the White decision. Do you think? Well, all right. What would you have done if you were Dana White? Before we get to what Dana White actually did.
Okay, so Bobby Moffitt was my number one.
Yep.
Right? We already so Greg Hardy is already under contract, so there's no contract there.
Right. Well, they could have promoted him to the UFC.
Yeah, but that's still not really I mean, he's already got a contract, so it's like whatever. Bobby Moffitt was number one for me. Just dominant, like obviously UFC ready, I think. And so that was a no-brainer. Second was actually a guy who didn't get signed. It was Gilpin. Very impressed with him. Has a track record and everything, so I was surprised they didn't sign him.
And he arguably had the toughest. I mean, him and Devontae Smith had the toughest opponents of the night. So,
yeah. So I was surprised by that. That was my number two. And actually, I had Devontae Smith as my my third. And then with Kennedy, I wanted to see a developmental contract because he's still very raw. I know it's second time on the Contender Series, but I mean, I don't know. It's just there's at 6-0 and being young and being, still incredibly raw. It was just I don't know. And we'll get to this when we try to match make them, but I just don't know who to put them up against. I really don't.
Yep. No, I completely agree there. But yeah, man, I think that the tweet that I had was that I would promote Greg Hardy to the UFC. I would sign Devontae Smith and sign who was my other one? Sign Smith. And Nchukwu I said I would sign. And the only reason that I would sign Nchukwu, I agree with you. I think he is very raw. There's two things that are working for him here. One is the fact that he's a light heavyweight.
True.
They need them. They can afford to take somebody on that's a little raw. Right. And then the other thing is that just as the matchup that he presents to people is so rare. He's like the Stefan Struve of the light heavyweights, really. I mean, he's humongous for that weight class. So I mean, I'm okay with it. I think that maybe his size can get him by for a little bit, where the other fighters that were that raw wouldn't be able to get by, just based on their athleticism, the base skill set that they have, and their gifts that they have, just from their physique and everything. So I was okay with it. Those were my three picks, but I also said that if Moffitt or Gilpin got it, I wouldn't complain. I mean, you could have really gone you could have given out 5 contracts. You could have given out 3 contracts. Doesn't matter to me. Mix and match. I would have been fine with pretty much anything Dana would have done. Short of not signing Devontae Smith, I thought his performance really stood out to me above the rest. But Dana picking up Kennedy Nchukwu, picking up Bobby Moffitt, and picking up
Devontae
Smith.
Yeah, so Gilpin was the guy who was left out. And then I totally agree with you. Greg Hardy, like I just said, throw him in the deep end, man. Like, we really do not need to see this guy fight another 3-0, 4-0 guy in LFA. Like, it just does nothing for us at this point. Right. We'll get to matchmaker in a second, but I mean, if we're gonna do matchmaker, I'm gonna try to find a heavyweight right now and you could tell me if Greg Hardy loses to him or not.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think you'd have to move up to, probably 10 fighters before I would pick somebody. If you're looking at the UFC, the UFC rankings, I guess you'd call it, the unofficial rankings. So, I mean, I think if he goes to LFA, which is what I'm assuming he'll do, I think that Jared Bandera would be a good matchup. I don't know if they want to match him up. There's a guy, Richard Odoms, who's 42 years old or 43 years old. He used to be in the UFC, and he got cut before he made his debut. He retired, came back, and then he was randomly on this tear. I know he's been looking for a fight. I don't know if that's a very good matchup for Greg Hardy, just because if he loses, he lost to a 42-year-old guy that probably on paper looks bad, but for regional heavyweights, he's actually pretty good. He went 5 rounds with I believe he went 5 rounds with Jeff Hughes when Hughes won the belt. I think Odoms was the defending champion in that fight. So yeah, that would maybe be my pick, would be a Vandera or somebody else that I might not even know about, just from the regional scene.
I'm gonna go super aggressive here and say just throw him to Christian Colombo on UFC.
I think he got cut, actually, Christian Colombo.
He's no longer on the roster?
Yeah, he's fighting in, if you go to, I think the best place, the one that's the most up-to-date roster, because the UFC leaves their fighters on sometimes forever. You on the UFC's page?
Fuck it then, Alan Crowder.
Yeah, that would be a good matchup. You know, that would be actually a really interesting matchup because something we didn't even talk about, you know, should they throw Greg Hardy, maybe somebody that has a strong wrestling base next, you know? Boone Gordon, his background was football. So, I mean, sure, he's muscled guys to the ground before, but predominantly somebody that's going to try to knock you out. And the same thing with Austin Lane. You know, he's not trying to take the fight to the ground. So maybe if they got him somebody with a wrestling background next, that would be a nice, you know, boost to like an Alan Crowder if he goes right to the UFC. That would be a good one. But, yeah, any other matchups stick out to you? I mean, we have Devontae Smith, who's entering the very tough UFC lightweight division. You know, I'm looking at it right now.
Yeah, I'm becoming more and more of a fan of like matching the Contender Series up with fellow Contender Series guys.
Yeah. Maybe Ocho. Or no, he's a featherweight. I'm looking at the wrong division.
From like last season, you know?
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
So if it's going to be like Devontae Smith coming into the UFC lightweight division, like, I mean, who do we have? We have Holloway, right?
Yeah, we have Kurt Holloway. That would be a fantastic matchup. I think I'm trying to think who else. We had Matt Frivola, who's 0-1. Didn't look great in his debut. Got knocked out, but an option.
It gives both fighters like. It gives the guy who came over from Contender Series to UFC a shot, as well as the like. It's just I feel like it's more even, I guess.
Mm. Yeah,
whereas Kevin Holland fighting Thiago Santos,
right?
Not so even.
And it's funny. Sometimes I think the UFC kind of not coddles, but certain prospects they want to work up, you know, give these bonus fights to. Most of the Contender Series guys have been just thrown right to the wolves, which I find is interesting. I don't know if that's intentional or just the way things have worked out, but I'm sure, you know, I'm not sure, but if it does, the matchmaking does mirror what it was last season when it's time for these guys to take their debut. I'm sure they're going to not shy away from giving these guys fighters that can give them a good, you know, pushback.
Yeah, definitely.
But yeah, so I mean, we have a bunch of options for Mr. Smith, and then the other one would be Kennedy and Chukwu. The pool for light heavyweights, man, we have a lot less options than we did previously. Maybe Mike Rodriguez. That would be an interesting fight because Mike I believe, has one of the top 3 longest reaches in the UFC. I believe, or maybe he's number 4 now, but I believe Struve and John Jones were the only 2 guys on the UFC roster that had a longer reach than Mike Rodriguez. Contender Series versus Contender Series.
Yeah.
So that's a possibility. And then Bobby Moffitt in the featherweight division. That's a deep one too, man. We could throw out a million names for that.
Yeah, it's so deep. I don't know. That's another one where like it's so deep. Just give him to another Contender Series winner.
Maybe Brandon Davis or.
Yeah, that's a good one. I like that.
Yeah, that might be my pick. But yeah, that's that. And just before we wrap things up here for the final time, I just want to get your thoughts on the Contender Series. Maybe if you could, I know we talked about this a little bit before we went on air, but you know, who stood out this season to you? If you had to take 3 names, you know, this will be used against you in the future, so make sure to pick your picks wisely. You know, if you had to pick 3 names of the people that the fighters that you think were the most impressive on the season, that will go the furthest in the sport, the prospects to watch per se, from Contender Series Season 2, who you got?
Well, I feel like my picks might not be the ones that go the farthest in the UFC, but
so who impressed you the most?
Yeah, like I'm more going for what I'm gonna go for here is the guys or girls with the highest upside.
Yeah.
So like if we're thinking in like baseball prospect terms, like probably that high school pitcher who throws 100 miles an hour but can't like really has no control whatsoever.
Yeah.
Not saying that, that these guys can't hit anything, but just that these are more high upside picks, and not so much the safer high floor, low. What is that saying? High floor, low ceiling.
Other way around.
Other way around.
Low floor, high ceiling. Yeah.
Alonzo Menafield, I thought very impressive. I don't know if we can really count Greg Hardy, but I think that the upside there is insane.
Yeah.
And it's just too hard to discredit. We've talked about the athleticism to death, so I won't go there. I don't even want Greg Hardy to count as one of my three.
Yeah, that's fine. I was gonna have him as an honorable mention just because he's not an officially signed off the show.
Yeah, true. We can do that little loophole because he doesn't have a UFC contract per se. So then I'm gonna go. Actually, the last two are gonna be women. They're gonna be Antonina Shevchenko, who I think kickboxing is just gonna Muay Thai is gonna take her a long ways. In a division that's just starting to grow. So that's gonna be. I think she has a lot of upside there. And then, of course, my third one would be Macy Barber, who I think has a lot of intangibles, a lot of heart, a lot of confidence, and actually just had her first UFC fight announced, and very excited to see her in the octagon.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Those are all good picks. It's tough to only pick three. I almost extended it to five, but I thought that would be letting us off the hook a little bit too much. So my three picks, I'm also going to go with Antonina Shevchenko. I think the reasons you listed pretty much outlined what we're going to see out of her in the future. I think that her striking abilities are so good, especially for that division. I think the women's flyweight division can use more contenders. She shouldn't have a problem, being in the top 15 within her first couple of UFC fights, which will be nice. And I'm excited to see, what happens down the line. If Valentina wins that belt, you never know. Antonina's going to have to shift up or down. So I was gonna joke and say they'd fight each other, but I just didn't want anybody to take me seriously on that one. But she's one of my picks. I think Anthony Hernandez is another one. I think this guy just went out there and demolished, his opponent. I know his opponent wasn't the best fighter on earth, but I think from what I've seen of him in the past, a little bit of, my cheat sheet in terms of making these picks. I think he's somebody that we're going to see to continue to improve. He's still so young in his career, and somebody that puts on exciting fights, getting better, more well-rounded, and went out there on Contender Series and showed that he's a dominant force to be reckoned with. And then my last pick, a little bit of a sleeper, I think, because his fight was so quick, but I'm going with T. Edwards. I think his upside is tremendous as well. I mean, he's got such a strong wrestling background. I think he's sitting at 6-1 now, 6 knockouts. For a guy that has an ASU wrestling background, that's not too shabby. So it will be interesting to see when we actually get to see him fight more than a few minutes or a few seconds, what he's got in store for us. But those are my three picks, and then the honorable mention, like you said, Greg Hardy. I think we've talked about him enough for this season, but I think that's it, man. I think that should do it for us. I mean, I don't know if there's anything else you want to get off your chest, but overall, a pretty good season.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of people wondering about the move to ESPN Plus next year. As far as the pacing goes and everything. If you ever watched anything on ESPN Plus that's exclusive to there, they don't have commercials. Like it just goes to like this little ESPN screen, and it has some like elevator type music. So it's not going to be like a Fox broadcast or anything. If you guys are worried about the pacing becoming an issue when it moves to ESPN Plus, it's not there. There's not going to be anything there. The presentation might be a little bit different, but other than that, I can't see very many changes. I know there's been a lot of questions and kind of people wondering about that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think the pacing can get much better. I know that's something that people have been harping on for the UFC cards that are going to air on ESPN Plus, but hopefully they keep everything the same. I just hope it doesn't. They don't mess with it. Honestly, if you have something that's working for you, stick with it. So yeah, man. The only other thing that I think I can bring up would be the Contender Series Brazil. You mentioned it. The taping is happening in Las Vegas. They've had a tremendous amount of visa issues that have forced fighters off the card. There's been last-second changes. There was a fight that just got signed on Sunday. It's going to be on Saturday of this week. So a lot going on there, a lot of moving parts. I'm going to have the lineups for that for the 3-day stretch, which takes place Thursday, Friday, and Saturday this week in Las Vegas. 5 fights each night that will be pre-recorded, airing for they're going to be sculpted into a made for Brazilian television TV show. I believe 3 episodes. Then we'll end up getting those episodes on Fight Pass eventually, kind of similar when they had Tough Brazil. I think we get it the day after the episode airs in Brazil, we get the replay here on Fight Pass. So I'm assuming it's going to be a similar type of deal. But I'll have the lineups up on Tapology tonight. Sean Bitter just tweeted out what he thought the lineups were going to be. I also have received the same list, I'm assuming from the same place he got it, because it was in the exact same order and everything. Sean's on top of things. I'm trying to be on top of things. Check out.
A couple quick questions about that. Why do you think there is so many visa issues?
I have no idea, man. You know, they've had a few years to a few months to figure this whole thing out. I mean, my understanding is that when these guys sign the dotted line, the expectation is that, and it's more of a trust than it is any type of binding agreement that they sign. Oh, I'm set here, here, and here. It's more of just like a trust agreement that, you have your shit intact. You have your visa all figured out. You're not on some type of, they're checking for this or that background or whatever. You have your shit together. But I don't know, man. That's a good question. I think that a lot of the fights did stay intact and a lot of them didn't. So I would say more did than didn't. But we'll see what goes on. What we end up with. Who knows? Things could even change between now and then.
And then do you think when it does eventually become available to the U.S. audience that it will have commentary?
I think it will be in Portuguese with subtitles.
Oh, okay.
That's my guess. I mean, that's what they did for Tough Brazil, so I'm assuming it's going to be on the same wavelength. But who knows? I mean, Brendan Fitzgerald, and Paul Felder are out there, so it's not like they need to make some crazy adjustments or anything. I'm assuming, Mick Maynard, Sean Shelby are staying out there. So
yeah, shout out to Paul Felder, who did an amazing job on Contender Series and continues to just be one of the rising best announcers, I guess, that we have out there.
I agree. Him and Fitzgerald are awesome, man. I think Fitzgerald's a big supporter of MMA Today and everything we've got going on. So got to give a big shout out to him too. We've seen the fighters evolve, and we've also seen the announcers evolve. Lara Sanko, I think, does a great job too. And just hopefully we get more of the same on all fronts, because this is a product that I think, last season we kind of saw the breakthrough. We've been following this since the start, and now I think this season we really saw, the whole the angry mob, but not an angry mob, a happy mob towards this, the crowd form around the Contender Series. So hopefully this continues and we get more of this going forward, because it's working, man. It's getting me excited for Tuesdays, which when in my life have I ever been excited for a Tuesday?
Yeah, and I really hope that ESPN holds on to Paul Felder. Got a chance to talk to him in Chicago, and just what a great guy. Great commentator, and I hope he continues to not only do the Contender Series but get more UFC gigs as well, like regular cards and whatnot, fight nights.
Yeah, 100%. But I think that should do it for us. I mean, you got anything going up this week? Anything else? Are you pretty much?
I'm moving to Vegas, so not a whole lot for me this week. I did talk to the Bare Knuckle FC president, founder. Some really cool stuff from him. They got, their first event was, surprisingly a huge success, kind of beloved by MMA fans. And I think the second event, they're ramping it up even more, bringing in even bigger names. So there's it's really interesting. I'm interested in this, and I'm wondering where it goes from here.
Yeah, 1,000%, man. And that's Big Tone at Big Tone MMA. You can follow him on Twitter. Got a lot of good stuff going on with MMA today. And as for me, anything that I've got coming out, I have a few interviews that are going to be up on MMA today. One with Alex Perez, one with Chito Vera, coming off their big wins last weekend. A few other, I got a couple of, I think as a team, we have a bunch of CES interviews coming out, a bunch of regional interviews coming out, a bunch of UFC interviews coming out. Definitely check there. You can also find me at Flow Combat and Tapology. Other than that, I think we're pretty much good to sign off for the last time. Maybe we'll have that Brazil episode, like I said, but I think that should do it. So thanks for tuning in, guys, and until next time, enjoy enjoy the MMA world. Enjoy watching MMA. Enjoy following us on Twitter at MMA_Kings, and that should do it.
Thanks, guys. Really appreciate it. Have a good night.